Today we're going to do a wacky bare bones tour of the Behringer PMP 4000. This board has lots of functionality and it's got lots of dials and buttons to go with it, but don't let that intimidate you. I'll show you the default settings and then from there you can play around and deviate to get the best sound possible. To unpack the soundboard from its carrying case, you just flip the front latches, open the case. Inside you'll find a power cord, two adapters for the speaker wires, and then there's also a foam pad that you need to remove which holds the soundboard inside the case. Just lift the soundboard out of the case and set the case aside. We're going to take a 20-second tour of the mixing board. In this area is the place where you have the input jacks. Then we have the channel controls. From there, the mixed signals go over to the master EQ section. We have the effects processor, then the master output volume controls, and that sends the signal out to the output jacks, which are located in two different places. We got output jacks for the powered output and jacks for the unpowered output. First connections to make in the back are the power cord, and that's next to the on-off button. Also in the back is where you insert and rotate to lock into place the adapters that came inside the carrying case. Now it is time to connect the inputs. There are no standard connections because every weekend we have a different number of players, different type of mics, different type of instruments. But it is a typical convention to have the microphones connected in the first few channels, have the instruments in the middle channels, and to have iPods and PC type players in the stereo channels that are near the end. So here you see me connecting up a wireless microphone to channel number 1, a wired mic into channel number 2. I don't have any instruments today, so I'm jumping over to the stereo from my iPod. I'm connecting the left and right channels from my iPod into the RCA jacks in channels 9 and 10. One aspect you need to be aware of for this board is that channels 9 through 16 are stereo channels and they have multiple ways of connecting input jacks. In this case, I'm connecting up the RCA jacks, which are the red and white ones, and they're going into the B port. It has the letter B beside it, so therefore I need to depress this button that's at the top of the channel to make sure it says the input is coming from the B ports, not the A ports, which happen to be quarter-inch jacks. Finally, I want to illustrate another typical type of input that is made into soundboards, and that is with a snake. Here we have a snake that has multiple lines. A snake will always have the lines numbered 1 through N, depending on how many lines there are in the snake. And as you can see, I've already connected to our input jacks 1 and 2 some microphones directly, so I'm going to skip lines 1 and 2 of the snake and find line number 3 and connect line number 3 into input jack number 3 on the board. Then I'll find the 4th line and connect it into the 4th input jack, etc., until I get out to input jack number 8. And that's what the snake connected to this board will look like. On the other end of the snake is the box that sits up on stage, numbering 1 through N, and I need to connect my instruments and my microphones into the various input ports. And again, following the typical convention of putting mics first, I'm going to put the first stage mic into the snake box number 3, which then, because of the way I connected the snake back at the soundboard, the microphone on stage is going to be channel number 3. The purpose of the snake is to carry many different channels from the stage to the soundboard in a nice, neat, pre-bundled set of wires. Final connections to be made before powering up the system are to the speakers. Here I'm connecting the powered output jacks to some typical house speakers. I've made all my connections and I'm almost ready to power on the system, but before I do that I need to make sure that the volume is down on all of the channels, and in the main section the volume is also down. This prevents pops and squeals and avoids potential damage to the system during the power-up cycle. Now we're ready to power up the system. The power button is in the back, and when you power up, the various lights should come on. The next step is to check to see that you're getting sound. You make sure that the mute button is off, in other words the light is not on, which means that channel is active. And then you increase the main volume and the volume on that channel until you hear a sound out of the mic and you know the system is up and running and is connected correctly. And finally, as promised at the beginning of the tape, I'm going to talk a little bit about the default settings for the dials. As I said at the beginning, these are just places to start. The top button controls how much signal goes through that rest of the entire channel. A good starting position for that is 12 o'clock, but if you've got a really strong signal coming through, you may need to lower that, or if you've got a very weak signal, you may need to increase it. Next are the three high, medium, and low EQ dials. Those should be set to 12, and minor adjustments can be made to those to improve your sound quality in that channel. The next two red buttons are monitors 1 and 2, and those can be set to 0 unless you intend to send a monitor sound to a different room. Effects can be set down to 0, and the pan should be set at 12 so that you get the same signal strength out of the left and the right. Finally, the sliders should be set in a way so that the sound is pleasing and properly mixed in the house. And finally, I want to cover a few other buttons and dials that are important on the board. On the upper right above the Master EQ is an extremely important button. That controls how the power amps operate through the rest of the board. My suggestion to simplify things is just to always keep it in the up position, which is main left and right. And when you do that, the slider called main 1 is the master volume control. Also, the phantom power should always be off. The EQ button should be up, which turns the EQ section off. Therefore, you end up with a flat-lined EQ, which is a good default position to start with. The effects button should be such that there is no dot next to the number in the lower right-hand corner. If the dot shows up, then you've got effects on, and you could be causing some reverb or some sound that you do not wish to have. And then the effects dials should be all down to 0.
And one last tip about preserving the health of this mixing board. The amps have fans that draw in cool air and vents under the bottom that expel the hot air. Do not block the fans or the exhaust vents. Be careful to not place the mixing board on a thick towel or rug or tablecloth.
This has been a bare bones tour of the Behringer 4000. I encourage you to continue to learn this craft. It's a great way to serve the performers, the audience, and the organizers of your event. See you next time.